This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. 2 years ago, Not Just Bikes, an urbanist YouTuber from Ontario who now lives in the Netherlands, visited Montreal and had some thoughts about our fine city. The first 15 minutes were about as positive as he's been about a city in North America.
Sure, you might find a small pedestrianized street here or there in other cities in North America, but nothing comes even close to the number and length of these streets in Montreal.
The last half hour was pretty scathing to balance things out.
I don't think Montreal is a great city. Montreal really made me lose interest in making any more videos about US or Canadian cities. It's just not worth the time, cost, and frustration.
Some criticisms were fair. Locals will tell you. EXO has infrequent commuter-focused service. Downtown has a lot of big, unfriendly roads. Daycare really does profoundly suck. Other criticisms I couldn't relate to so much. We don't have much residential traffic calming. I think he's too dismissive of bike share. And I don't really get the tram fascination. When we visited the Netherlands, I was way more impressed by the biking than the trams. They were fine, but this was awesome. But the point of this video is not to litigate what he got right and what he got wrong. I want to cover something more interesting, how Montreal has already changed since his video 2 years ago in 2023.
The destruction of the streetcar network explains another major problem with Montreal. When you exit many of the metro stations, you're dumped out of the side of an absolutely terrible stroad.
This is maybe the most featured location in his video.
Absolutely nothing on major dangerous roads.
It's 6 lanes for cars, and not very nice for walking, let alone biking. Or rather, it was 6 lanes for cars. Major improvements for pedestrians too. That includes pedestrian islands to cross mid-block, wider sidewalks near the metro. The speed limit has been dropped to 30 kilometers an hour. Here's a map of construction in 2025. This is the metro station he filmed outside of. The current plan is for this new design to cover about 7 kilometers.
While my hotel was on this landing strip. Still, it did make me realize that Montreal was not as great as I'd been led to believe, even on the best street in the best neighborhood in the city.
This is where the city's busiest bike corridor used to end. Before his video even came out, it was extended with bike lanes on both sides of the street. There were signs indicating this plan while he was here. The extension isn't that long, about 300 meters, but it turns a corner and connects better with 3 other routes. Also improvements to traffic calming and bus stops.
Now, I'm not going to fault Montreal too much for this. Every city repairing bad car infrastructure will have some streets that have been fixed and others that have not.
This one's been substantially improved too. It used to be 4 lanes for cars with a narrow painted bike lane that effectively disappeared in winter. Construction time! It's now been replaced by a much wider and nicer bike lane, the kind you could actually take your children on. This project also installed a bus lane for one of the busiest routes in the city. Unfortunately, it's rush hour only. Fortunately, the police seem to actually enforce it.
I needed to cycle down this stroad, but I didn't because it was too dangerous.
No bike lanes, but this is currently getting a bus rapid transit corridor. Most of the 13-kilometer route actually opened back in 2022, but this part is still under construction as of 2025.
It's like the middle of the street has been dug out to save drivers a few seconds of travel time. And to be crystal clear, this is not some far-flung suburb. This is what you see literally as soon as you exit one of the major metro stations in the plateau. As far as I can tell, Montreal has no plans to change any of this.
Here are plans to change it. Construction on the metro station down there, starting next month, is going to include an overhaul of the street with more attention to pedestrians and bikes. That'll include upgrading the old 2-way bike lane to separate 1-way cycle tracks on each side, to meet modern rev or express bike corridor standards. That's less space for cars and more space for bikes, to better handle rush hours, snow, and cargo bikes. The trench isn't going away, but I'm not sure I want it to. It was built for cars in the 1950s, but it helps bikes by spreading the elevation gain over twice the distance. Where would you rather climb? It's probably why this street was chosen for a bike lane in the first place back in the 80s, instead of other streets nearby with a steeper grade.
Unfortunately, there are no Dutch-style protected intersections for cyclists, which was a bit disappointing.
Montreal now has one standard full-size protected intersection, plus a handful of others that use similar ideas.
A one-way road like this should not exist downtown, and although the bike lane is well designed, there's nothing on the other side, so this guy is cycling on the sidewalk.
This remains a large one-way street, but the one-way street in the other direction one street over now has its own well-designed bike lane too.
I pulled out my map to find the best way to get out of here. This is not how I expected this walk to go.
The highway he complained about is still here, but this street running beside it is better now. It has its own express bike corridor, with some especially nice sections. It connects with the bike lane back here, and now forms a 4 or 5 kilometer express bike corridor along the southern edge of downtown.
This means that there is a lot of bicycle infrastructure in Montreal that is experimental in order to build as much infrastructure as possible under the constraints of a historically car-centric city.
True, but this section has been upgraded, with nicer pavement, paint, protection, and bus stops.
The pedestrianized streets in Montreal were absolutely great, but there are also important caveats here too. These are only temporary. The longest of them is open for about a third of the year, but most of them are open for less than 15 weeks. So if I had visited at almost any time of the year besides summer, I would have missed them. And these planters are nice, and so is the temporary paint, but ultimately it could be designed to be so much nicer if this were permanent.
One of them was announced for year-round pedestrianization. That'll include a large-scale redesign to be permanently pedestrian-oriented, instead of a road with sidewalks. Another, featured in the very first shot of his video,
Montreal is one of the largest cities in Canada,
is also going to be redesigned with permanent installations, but it's going to alternate between car-free in the summer and one lane of cars in the winter. And then other streets in Old Montreal became year-round pedestrian in 2024. Most of Montreal's pedestrian streets are still summer only, but we're heading in the direction of year-round. Montreal is noticeably colder and snowier than any European capital, including the Nordics. It's still possible, but it takes more planning, creativity, and experimentation.
I walked one block south, and this street was not so nice, a wide one-way street with high-speed traffic. It was undergoing construction though, so maybe this will become a bicycle lane?
This is Montreal's main shopping street downtown. The construction is gradually turning the street into this. Not trams or completely car-free, but substantially more pedestrian-oriented, with the car lane taking only 1/3 of the total space. If he'd gone a few blocks east, he would have seen sections that were already complete. Here's a before and after of a completed section. The project is happening over a few years to line up with underground utility work. Once done, it'll cover about 3 kilometers through the heart of downtown. One proposal would break up the street with 4 fully pedestrianized plazas, although there's been some controversy, so I don't know if that's happening for sure.
But these projects aren't always ideal, and it's clear that there are still compromises being made when making space for bicycles.
This bike lane is now wider with a bigger buffer. Take a look from above.
A common trend in great cities are new neighborhoods that are being built to be nearly car-free from the start. But even the new downtown neighborhoods I visited in Montreal were still being built to be very car-friendly. This is really disappointing because it's locking in car-centric design for generations.
This is Griffintown, the biggest new development downtown. I can't say nearly car-free, but it is shaping up to be more low-car than I think even Montrealers realize. This is the model for a street within the neighborhood. Look at the width of the car lane versus the bike lane. I definitely wouldn't call that very car-friendly. This street with parking? Goodbye. Many of the streets still use bare temporary designs like this, because anything nicer will get crushed by the truck traffic for the ongoing residential construction. But ignoring the plain surface, they've already allocated more space to active transportation than to cars. Some other new developments in the region will likely be going further than this when it comes to low-car design.
Holy shit! I have taken public transit in literally hundreds of cities around the world, and I have never in my life seen the area outside of a metro station that was this bad.
This whole area is set for redevelopment. A new neighborhood with 20,000 homes is going to be built on that former racetrack.
Découvrez le plus important projet de développement urbain de la prochaine décennie.
There's been talk of a tram and capping the square over the highway, although I don't think those plans are quite finalized yet. There's also an express bike corridor, already under construction further to the east, that's planned to go by this metro station. It was visible on the map that he showed in the video.
Here, you don't load money, you load individual tickets or passes, and the only place you can do that is at a physical ticket machine. This means that there are enormous ticket lines at every metro station.
You can now load transit tickets to your Opus card through your phone using an app, meaning you no longer have to bother with the fare machines in the metro. Paying directly with your phone with no separate fare card required is apparently coming within a few months.
Don't even get me started on how bad the land use is around the suburban REM stations. Unfortunately, that's pretty normal for Canadian transit.
3 suburban stations were open when he was here. One is quite empty, but it's planned to be the new downtown for the suburb of Brossard. A 30-story tower was recently announced with more to follow. The next one is a big mall with lots of parking, but also lots of residential density under construction. Then the terminus really is just a big parking lot, plus a maintenance facility. But it's also just beyond the edge of suburban development in Montreal, surrounded by forest and farmland.
All 3 of these places were difficult or impossible to reach by public transit, even the 2 that are officially part of the city. These 2 may become more accessible when the full REM system is completed, though.
Yes, the main branch of the REM is now open. You can now more easily visit your friends on the suburban West Island. I would like to thank Not Just Bikes for reviewing our city and finding all these problems for us to fix. We couldn't have done it without you. I'm joking. Most of these have been in the works for a while. The bike projects were in the city's Bike Vision Plan, released and covered in the media a year before his video. I don't know that I expect someone visiting for a week to dive this deep or have this background, but it does leave the complaints increasingly out of date, especially for a city like Montreal that's known for how fast it's improving. Now, I don't want to give the impression that everything he complained about has been fixed. Despite calls for an express bike corridor, this street is still bad. The city turned down a transit project that could have fixed this street. There's been talk of fixing this street, but no concrete plans yet. We haven't removed any highways. But a lot has changed, or is scheduled to be changed, and I think that's pretty cool. The elephant in the room is the election last month, where the Urbanist Party lost. Why? Partly backlash. There's been populist opposition here, like in other places. Also a generic desire for change after 8 years of one party, and also frustration over housing and homelessness. I'm not gonna lie, it's a big disappointment. Progress over the next 4 years will be slower. Exactly how much slower, and whether we're gonna go backwards in anything, we don't really know yet. It's possible they could change some of the plans covered in this video. I do know this is not the end of Montreal's urbanist transformation. Boroughs have the power to do many smaller changes locally, and we'll have another shot at City Hall in 4 years. The last 8 years have fundamentally changed the city's politics. Urbanists got a taste of what can be done when you're ambitious, and even the skeptics now accept more than they did before. While I have you, here's context for some other things he mentioned in his video.
These are great for casual use. Bike share is a cute idea when a small percentage of your population rides a bike as an easy way to get more people to cycle. But it just doesn't work when the majority of people ride bicycles.
Bike share is actually priced to be most useful for regular users, not casual ones. 90% of Bixi trips are done by members, who pay around $20 a month for unlimited rides. That's 1/5 the cost of a transit pass. I love these. I've covered thousands of kilometers on them. They're easy to combine with walking or transit and not have to worry at all about theft. Bike share use is growing every year in Montreal. We'll see if it hits a wall where it's hard to manage logistically, but the people I've talked to at Bixi didn't seem too worried. After all, bike share in Paris already handles 50 million trips a year, compared to our 13 million. I think when people say they can't imagine it working with the cycling volumes of Denmark or the Netherlands, they're often picturing like all trips being done by bike share. In Montreal, they're common, but not a majority of bike trips.
But for the most part, residential streets had very high vehicle speeds, which is why the city needs to overbuild the bicycle infrastructure in order to be safe, even on streets like this.
This isn't a residential street. It's a 6-lane major arterial, technically a provincial highway. That's not to defend it. It's not a good street. This smaller residential street actually has traffic filters. In 1, 2, 3, 4 places, including the entrance to the street, which was fully pedestrianized 10 years ago. You might not even know this used to be a road. Still, this street has a bike lane. Even with low traffic volumes, Montreal's side street routes often have bike lanes too. Maybe overkill from a Dutch perspective, but I appreciate it. I've ridden in cities for 10 years now, and honestly, I still find it unpleasant to have cars behind me. We're not in the same place as the Netherlands, where almost every driver is also a cyclist.
A lot of people told me I absolutely must check out the parks in Montreal, but to be honest, I'm not really sure why. Montreal has several parks, but I wouldn't say they're any more or less impressive or more plentiful than in most other decent cities. Some are big and some are small, and that's the parks of Montreal.
Wait, are you calling Montreal a decent city? Aw, shucks. I think they're pretty well designed, but what I really appreciate here is the park culture. It's not this. It's this. Parks are like the backyard of the city here. Barbecues, birthday parties, yard sales. They're super lively, especially on summer evenings and weekends. When we meet up with friends, we'll often go to a park and have a few beers with some food. Not so common, or legal, in other places we've lived.
And if you're able to find a way to live and work in one of the great walkable islands, then you could really carve out a great life for yourself here in Montreal. Just, don't walk 2 blocks south.
The central city being an island surrounded by much less walkable suburbia is true. The idea that you're constantly shocked and endangered by walking one street over was overblown. To put it in perspective, Greater Montreal has a population just over 4 million people. The Regional Travel Survey identifies a large central city, 1.2 million people, where cars are a solid minority of trips. Not all is as polished as the Plateau, Rosemont, or Villeray. There are certainly streets that are unpleasant or dangerous, but I find it generally pretty practical to get around here through a combination of walking, cycling, and transit. And the numbers back that up. Only 38% of trips here are done by car, even if that rises to 70 or 80% in the suburbs. I can even get to many suburban locations fine by bike or transit, although that is much more hit or miss.
But like all Canadian cities, it would definitely be a compromise to live in Montreal without owning a car.
I live car-free in Montreal and don't consider it a compromise. I haven't even bothered switching my license over to Quebec since moving back 3 years ago, so I can't even legally drive now. I'm gonna get around to that, but it obviously hasn't mattered much so far. Many people still own cars, whether for work or to get out of the city or for something else. But in large parts of the city, it is definitely not a default requirement.
But I also spent over $100 in taxis in a single day because public transit was so bad outside of the core region.
Outside of pregnancy and sometimes the airport, we almost never take taxis. My Uber account was actually automatically deleted for inactivity recently. No joke, I didn't even know they did that. Also, this location is like a 15-minute bus ride to the metro. Google Maps is even saying that transit is faster than driving to get downtown from here, though that will depend on time of day and traffic. I'm sure there are contexts where taxis are useful, but that location is not that far out. The basic theme of the video is that he felt disappointed, misled about Montreal.
I've been repeatedly told it's just as good as the best European cities, and
I think this was played up for the video. Who told you this? Montreal isn't Paris, despite the accents on the plateau. It's not Vienna or Copenhagen. You could maybe situate it relative to some other European cities. I felt some similarities with Brussels, and I've heard people compare it to aspects of Berlin, Lyon, and Glasgow. But fundamentally, Montreal is not a European city, and that's not the best starting point for understanding it. If you want a better starting point, Montreal has the density of an older American industrial center like Chicago, Philadelphia, or Brooklyn. Its public transit fits the Canadian pattern, well used but underbuilt. Its attitudes to housing and public space are deeply rooted in Quebec. It's more tuned into European urban design trends for pedestrians and cyclists than English North America is. It has an ecosystem of homegrown innovation, things like Bixi, locomotion, and commune auto. Relevant for many things as climate is like Moscow or Minneapolis. The point of Montreal in the urbanist space is not as a world-leading powerhouse trading blows with Paris or Tokyo. It's as a North American city that embraced pedestrian and cycling improvements sooner and has been making really cool progress. It can even be hard to see as a visitor because you assume that was always like that. But no, it wasn't. And it's a city whose progress feels more relevant and relatable. European and Asian cities sometimes feel too different, too distant. If you're pushing for more pedestrian streets in your city, Toronto, Seattle, elsewhere, it's often more effective to point to Montreal, or another local example, than to a European city. That's an angle you miss with the "my city can beat up your city" mindset.
I don't think Montreal is a great city.
People aren't just interested in ranking cities and declaring which ones are great and which ones suck. People who are invested in their city, who are willing to put in some work for their city, also want to see examples, models, and stories that are useful to them in advocating for and improving the place they call home.